call our meeting to order, and it is 4:32. I need a motion to approve our agenda. Brian? Nicole? All in favor? Aye. 7-0. If you're viewing in from home, this is our workshop portion of this marathon evening. We'll be on again later with our business meeting, so feel free to view then as well. But during our workshops, it's more of a conversation. We usually get information and then have more of a discussion, which is different than our business meeting. So that's why if you are watching from home, it may look a little different. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Provenzano.
Hi, how are you? How's everybody doing?
Good.
Welcome to October. It's exciting when we're starting off with a piece on our data dashboard. One of the board commitments is to make sure that we have an aligned curriculum, that our students are showing progress, and then we're using a common process to help measure our success as a school district. I'm going to ask Kristen Irwin and Dr. Tanya Wilson-Thevenason to come forward to talk a little bit about some data that they've been using the past several weeks and that are important to our student growth. But one of the pieces that I want to just reiterate and continue to frame, this is directly aligned to our strategic plan, making sure that our students are engaged in challenging coursework and responsive programming and instruction, and making sure that when we do provide supports that it is in the best interest for students. We have this process, which I think our team's going to talk a little bit about, our MTSS process of our decision problem solving process that we run our data cycles through. For the board's perspective, these were questions that we established last year that I think helps us have a productive conversation here tonight. What does the data say? What does the data mean? And what questions does the data arise? And what is going to be the district response? And I think there's many opportunities for the boards to ask questions, and I'm using those as our framework will be helpful. And the district response, I know this team has lots to say about how we're trying to rally and support, provide resources. So without further ado, Dr. T and Kristen Irwin.
All right, thank you so much for having us here tonight. Thank you for grounding us, Superintendent Provenzano, just in our commitments as a district. Specifically tonight, we're going to talk about the responsive interventions and instruction that we're doing based on a range of assessments. And Kristen is here with me representing part of our instructional team. Kristen Irwin is a teacher on assignment, TOSA for short, if you know the ed lingo. Teacher on assignment, she works K-12 humanities, which is a big job, and she supports Jackie Sauter, who would have been here tonight, our director of humanities, but is off leading curriculum writing with our K-5 team as we make adjustments to wit and wisdom. So all great work. The team is working really hard, and we're happy to have Kristen with us tonight. And as Superintendent Provenzano said, everything we do is grounded in this cycle of MTSS. So we look at the data, we identify the need, we analyze the need, we develop a plan, we progress monitor, we provide those interventions and supports, and then we look and see if it's working. And we do that throughout the year. Sometimes we do that with lagging data, which is what we're going to start with today. And sometimes we do that with progress monitoring and universal screens, which we're also going to talk about today. Again, the questions are, what's the data say and mean? And then what questions do you have for us? And then we'll share with you what we're doing as a district. All right, here's our lagging data. And you'll see the data is from 2022, 23, and 24 for ELA proficiency. So if you're a family at home that gets these reports, that's kids earning a 3 or 4 on the New York State ELA exam that's given in grades 3 through 8. This is the earliest we've ever received this data from the state. They released that end of September to us, which was really exciting. Usually we're waiting still. So we're really happy about that. And you'll see that we have made relatively steady but slow growth. And there's some bumps in the road there. You'll see 6th grade specifically. But if you're looking at it as cohort data, right? So if you look at blue 3rd grade in 2022, those are your 4th graders in red and your 5th graders in yellow. Right, so it's a little tricky, but it's cohort data, but we also look at data across grade level for the year. Any questions specifically on that?
Yeah, really,
yeah, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, I guess I mean, I'll probably ask this question a lot in this presentation, so forgive me, but what is our realistic benchmark that we should be looking for here? Like the progress is great, it's good to see, but what do we, in a perfect ideal situation, realistic ideal, that's the thing. What are we hoping these numbers look like?
In a perfect situation, we would be looking for incremental growth year for year, both among the grade levels and then also among the cohort levels. We set ourselves a goal of 2% each year for ELA. So, and we set the same for math. But ELA is a little bit of a bumpier path, I would say, for us at this point. Just a reminder, we just implemented K-5 common curriculum fully implemented last year. So when we did that, and you'll see our math data in just a second, when we did that for math, which we've been living in now, I think this is our 5th year for math, we are seeing the fruits of that labor. And so it's a little bit, we're in the right direction, but it's going to be a little bit slower for us to see the fruits of that.
And can I'm seeing just really
Yeah,
a really
please.
quick clarifying question. So this is the 2024 test. So those are current 3rd graders, current 4th graders.
No.
That's okay. That's a year lagging.
So so it's lagging data. So
Gotcha,
that
thank you.
yellow bar for 3rd graders, those kids are now in grade 4.
Thank you.
Right? And so when our teachers are looking at this data, what we have them do is we look at standards and we look at the gap to both the area. So our gap on a standard or a question to the area, and then also to New York State. So sometimes we're performing higher than our area, Monroe County, and sometimes we're performing lower. Sometimes we're performing higher than the state, and sometimes we're performing lower. Go ahead, Brett.
Just to build upon that question, and you told me this, I think several weeks ago, it's hard to predict as we start off in this journey of using data because we don't have 5, 6, 7 years
That's right.
to sort of mine, right? And I'm more concerned with the collaborative conversations that are occurring and the process that we're using and the curriculum. And if those are consistent, I think we're naturally going to see growth trajectories because I think we've said it here. We know what happens with those cut scores, right? We know what happens with
they
that.
change.
And,
Sorry, yeah.
and that's, I think, when we're always looking at the New York State scores to keep that lens on it, that New York State, it's not that 5th grade to that 6th grade, the metrics were the same for the cut scores. It changes so much. It's a great data point, but to keep in mind that the proficiency is not mastery based.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Mary Caitlin. It not only do the cut scores change, the question types change. Sometimes students do better on multiple choice than they do on constructed response, and those are the things that we actually want teachers to look at. So if my 3rd grade team is looking at the data from last year, they would want to look at specific question type and standard. So we might be able to do standard RI 4A, because there's a million standards too, right? So we might be able to do really well on that and multiple choice, but when it comes to constructed response, we're not doing well. And so to us as a district, that would say, okay, maybe that's something we need to focus on and make sure we're highlighting in our instruction this year. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Do you receive that detailed data by student or by grade level,
Both.
by school? Okay.
Yep, we get it by district, we get it by school, and then we get it by student. So you can do district, school, classroom, student. And so we can drill all the way in as much as we need to.
So can you give an example
Yeah.
where you've seen that student interaction and how Panorama helps us drill down to the student? Because this is not the student, this is an overall, but
Yeah, this is, yep. So when we get to this level of detail in our districts, remember it's a slow rollout also for Panorama. It does exist. We can see kids' scores by kiddo. So if I was to pull up one of Lisa's kids, I could see their performance on our universal screeners right now, attendance, behavior if there was any referrals, and then also their performance on New York State test. And so we get a little picture, and also the SEL screener if they took that. So we get a little snapshot of your child, and this is one of the pieces of that snapshot. And as Mary Caitlin said, it's one data point, and it's a lagging data point. And on that, anything you wanted to add, Kristen?
No, I think for us, as we're like really drilling into this information, what we're seeing a lot is the written responses. So like for us, for curriculum writing, that's like a huge indicator of when we're looking at our curriculum, like what do we really need to hit and how do we systematically build that K-5 and then look at that 6, 8 and above. So that's the data that's really, we're really looking at. That is really gonna help us with our next step of curriculum writing.
And that's common, is that written responses are less proficient than our multiple choice in general. All right, here's our math. This one's a little bit more exciting and more to celebrate. We have made significant growth in our math performance. And so, you know, you take it with a grain of salt for the ELA, but then you're like, woohoo, go math, right? So you put in as much energy into this data as you do into the other one, although it is a little bit more exciting to see that we are making not just almost consistent steady growth, but like double-digit point growth in almost all of our grade levels. So that's really exciting. One point for the 8th grade is that our algebra kids get pulled out of that mix.
I
So
was
this
gonna
is just
mention
their
that.
scores on 3-8, not on algebra. And so we do have, I think it's 2 sections of algebra at both of our middle schools. That grade 8, they don't sit for this test.
They don't. And
They only take the algebra.
do you know why that is? Because I think in other schools they do.
You can
Which
have them
would
sit
in-
for both, but we make a decision not to over-test
Have
students.
overtest.
So that was something that was confirmed probably about 8 years ago, that there was a decision with the board interest of, you know, why you continue to test those students when we know that they would be proficient. So that's something we can look at as we move along, but that was something that was an old standing priority.
They take the regents, yeah, and that counts towards graduation, which is a test that truly matters for them in their life. I come from a district where the state was monitoring us, and we had to meet metrics. We made the same decision in that district not to have kids sit for both tests. So I would stand by that decision and continue to recommend that we test kids when we need to test kids. So.
Right, and if they're in algebra, we're assuming they're proficient anyway, so.
Well, yeah, and we know their data from grade 7, right? Because they sat for that test. So like our current 8th graders would have been the yellow 7s.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
Speaking myself, I appreciate that we're focused on what's best for the kiddos instead of trying to just pad our scores here, which would be a reason for them to do
There's
that.
no reason to pad our scores, honestly, right? Except for patting our own backs on that. But we do extremely well in our 8th graders that take the algebra regents. Any other questions on that? And just a reminder, we've had this curriculum for 5 years that we've been using, and so you start to see that impact.
Which could be another data point to put out there if we're looking to say that, you know, we have a comprehensive assessment suite. We have students taking multiple different assessments. I think that would tell a story, because you're right, it only tells.
It would be interesting to see that on here and like 8th grade and then next to it a bar for like regents passing, like algebra
It would be
passing.
100%.
It'd be 100. It would be
It's 100.
Yeah,
And
it'd
then,
just be interesting to be able to say that, like, and,
Yeah.
you know.
you
but,
know what?
I mean,
Next year, I
Just
will
you
I will
saying
add
that.
that.
Putting
It's
a note-
100%, everybody.
putting
All
it
of our
in
8th
shoulders.
graders, green, 100. It's amazing. And actually, they do. They get 4s and 5s on that test, which is on a different scale, which is also kind of why it's tricky, right? So they get 4s and 5s on a scale of proficiency, which is a 1 out of 5.
So again, just throwing out questions that we got excited about the math. Can we talk about why are we so excited about the math relative to these scores around the curriculum pieces that we've been working on?
Yeah, I think it speaks to consistency. It speaks to the fact that we very intentionally chose a math program that is about both conceptual math, but also the foundational math and numeracy. It's both and, it's not a one or the other. And it was a heavy lift, if you remember, if anybody was on the board or living it with their kiddos 5 years ago, right before COVID. And then we lived it, we rode the wave. This is leftover from Kristen Larson. Thank you, Kristen Larson. I know you're tuned in your new role, but she really helped to support us through that hurdle of adopting a new curriculum. And we are coming out on the other side right now with our wit and wisdom on that too, which is why we're so happy that we're out writing curriculum right now. Good. All right, lagging data done. Oh, almost, just kidding. We have a new test, a new but old test. So the science test was on pause for grades, it used to be 4 and 8. They paused grade 4, rewrote the science exams, brought it back last year, and gave it to our 5th graders and our 8th graders. I'm showing you this. There's no historical data because it's a brand new test. Again, it happened. We have our results. We're we're not happy with them because we have nothing to base them against. And just, we'll only talk about Fairport here, but across the region, this is what people saw. It was not an easy test. Very, very dense, especially at grade 5. Very, very heavy in literacy, long questions. So we know now. We know what it looks like. And it's going to look like that probably for the next 3 years because the tests are written out like that. They are assembling a group of practitioners to make some adjustments, but we're a ways away from those adjustments.
Tanya, the eighth grade scores, is the same true with the science as it is with algebra? Those students who are in earth science
You got it.
don't take it.
They don't take it. Yep. Pulled out our earth science kiddos.
Did they pilot this before?
So they always sneak in a question or two, but because there was no 4th or 5th grade test, there was
Yeah.
no place to test those questions against.
Okay.
What I'm actually going to the assistant superintendent of instruction retreat Thursday and Friday of this week, and one of the things we're going to be doing is really digging into those questions. They do align very closely. If you know anything about the new science exams and curriculum, we have to have our students do specific labs throughout the year. The questions do align to those labs. They're just, when I tell you one of the 5th grade questions is like this long, and it's got steps and things, and right, it was
It's a lot of reading.
a lot of reading.
So for kids who are struggling to read, it's an even more difficult test for them, even at 8th grade.
And we are going, just for this information, we are going completely computer-based in the next year. This was also all computer-based testing. New York State is having us move towards that direction. So this science exam was computer-based, but you will do the same thing in a test that's paper. When you're frustrated and struggling, you're just going to circle an answer. You're just going to scroll and click. And so it's a lot of work we have to do both with our students on stamina, because they're going to need that beyond this test. This test is a test. It tells us something. It's an assessment. But kids need stamina. They need to struggle and read and stick with it. And they do have, I'm confident they will have this background knowledge, especially as we're understanding the test more and the labs more. But it was year 1, so. I wasn't even going to show you, but it's public, so I was like, okay, fine, we'll put it out there.
Tanya, and Kristen, one last question. I'm curious what our opting out rates are looking like across ELA.
Nothing
math
to
and
even
science.
talk about at
Really?
this
Okay.
at this point. Yep, we used to hit the
Lead the
charts.
league.
Lead. Yep, we used to famously be the opt-out district, especially in our area, and we have gone the other way. And I can't speak to exactly why that is. Somebody asked me, one of the data people from BOCES asked me, what did you do? Nothing. I think one of the things that we did was stop talking about the opting out option so much. Of course, parents are still welcome to do that. But we do find value ourselves now that we're specifically looking at the data, looking at the standards, and informing instruction. It matters that we have all kids take a test so that we can have the best picture possible.
As an opt-out parent for many years, I think the format changed too, right? So the length of a lot of the tests changed, so that I think had an impact, and I think messaging around it, like you said,
The purpose.
yeah, the purpose of it changed.
Good. Okay, so this is our informing data. That was our lagging data. That's things we can use. But this is what our universal screener showed us for this year. And I'm going to lean on Kristen a little bit more on this one because this is her wheelhouse. We universal screen every student, K-8. And this is our K-5 data. It's separated because we do 2 different screeners. So this is our universal screener. Do you want to speak to this, Kristen, a little bit?
So this is our literacy. So at kindergarten, they did a letter naming fluency and a letter word sound fluency. How quickly and automatic do they know the letters and sounds? And then at 1 through 5, they did an ORF. It's just a 1-minute passage. Again, how accurate are they and how automatic are they? So ORF is an oral reading fluency. So they get a passage, it's about 100 to 200 words, some are 150, and how much can they read in a minute? And then we will calculate how accurate are they, how many mistakes did they make, and how fast. So how many words did they get in a minute? And then we compare that to the norms that are given to us, and this is how our students did. So overall, I would say, overall we did better than last year. We're improving since last year. That first grade number stands out a little bit, 114, but they're still babies, and we're asking them to read and blend. So we expect that number to be pretty high, but by January, that number goes down low, just with the instruction that we're doing. But we also want to make sure we're assessing these kids and comparing them to the norm so that we can get them early. We'd rather get them early now, get them the help that they need, so that by January, hopefully, they can be out or moving, progressing. So we were excited by some of this data.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, there we go. Are these all students? Are they separated in any way?
No, this is all students.
So
Okay.
this would also include any special education
Yep.
students, students who have speech issues or other cognitive disabilities where literacy might be a challenge.
Yep, everyone, students with disabilities, students with speech supports, and our English as a second language students as well. Everybody gets screened.
And the only changes there might be for students who are like tested or opted out of testing because of a disability. Then I think they still took the test, but some of their modifications were put into place.
I guess one of the wonders I have on this, especially with the K numbers, is as we continue to build and develop UPK, are we going to see? Are we going to see these numbers start to shift at all? Or is that an expectation?
Yeah, that's actually not an expectation at all. We would like to see students school ready because of UPK, but for us, school ready is being able to follow directions, sit in a circle, walk in a line, right? Share and play with others. At kindergarten, the expectation is you know nothing. You know no letters, you know no numbers. And so that's not surprising that 92 of our kiddos qualified for tier 3 intervention.
Do we set cut scores for this? So if any kid needs that tier 1 intervention, we never say like, well, we only have 12 slots.
So we have to set so what you see here are the cut scores by AIMSweb. So AIMSweb sets norms for cut scores. So those are nationally normed. We service kids based on the amount of interventionists that we have. So we do have to set an internal cut score to make sure that we can service the most kids in the best way that we can possibly service. And that's always a battle. And Kristen is part of the battle. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you want to give kids everything and every chance and service them kids as many kids as possible, but also know that you can't really do it well with a group over 5. We only have so many interventionists, and there's other pieces. But we also just philosophically, we want to get them early, but we also don't want to send any of those 5th graders out without doing everything we can possibly do. So it's always a balancing act of like how many kids and where and who.
I'd be curious how many interventionists we'd need to support every student who needs it.
We can get that number for you.
But I would also say, tier 1 instruction matters. What we're trying to do is build it. Do you want to take it?
Yeah, no, 100%. And actually, we just had this conversation again today. So we do this universal screener throughout September. It's like the first, second, and third week of September. Intervention just started. Our interventionists then do a quick probe of progress monitoring, and they're like, do we have to do that probe? Yes, because 4 weeks of instruction happened. And so you expect to see growth from the time we did that universal screener until now, because they've been experiencing school. They've had tier 1 instruction. They've had some tier 2 intervention. That what you need time, that what I need time, that win block exists. And so kids have been doing things like IXL and reading decodables and things like that. So we do expect some movement even without intervention.
And this is also a bottomless questions for the ages, because you this number, you could be chasing it. And that's why I'm more concerned with, our teachers focus on quality tier 1 instruction, making sure that our systems allow for a guaranteed reading program, which you guys, the science of reading, have been cutting edge on that. I think all those natural things, by the time these students are in 3rd grade, you'll see numbers looking differently over time. I think just like we're seeing the math, I think you'll be seeing the literacy.
I think though too, definitely agree with that, and I'm so glad we're reinforcing our tier 1. I know I've heard many parents come to me and say, at my parent-teacher conference, I was told that my child is really low, but there aren't enough interventionists to help them, and that's really hard to hear as a district like ours, especially as we're putting a lot of money into capital improvement and other things. Like, if we have kids who need help to read, So I'm just curious what that looks like, how
Yeah,
we'd be able to
we can
support
get you that number on what would be recommended to service all students in tier 3. It would be a different number to service all kids in tier 2 and 3. Because those tier 2 kids, if you can picture that triangle, right? That yellow block is pretty big. They're either closer to the red or they're closer to the green. And so at some point you're going to have to call it and say, all right, it's these kids, right?
And I like the idea of the probe too, like, because sometimes it's regression over the summer, so that fall number, they haven't been in school for a while, they might jump right back up, or how are they responding to the tier 1? So you can
That's
kind of
right.
see, the
Yeah, I'm
trajectory.
laughing, Lisa, because I remember, I think it was like my sophomore year of high school. I forgot how to spell the word "the," just because I hadn't written anything all summer. But summer regression is real, not just forgetting how to write the word. And Brett's going to use that against me probably for the rest of my life. Thank you. But yeah, and you see our tier 3 numbers, K1, and then it drops drastically too. That's exactly what happens with solid tier 1 instruction and intervention. We're also really excited about some tier 2 opportunities. So there's a block in our K5 master schedule called What I Need When. At that point during that block, students go to intervention if they need intervention, tier 3. And so you'll have kids go off to reading, and we'll do math in a second, or off to math, or some kids go off to both on other days. And then you have this whole group of kiddos left behind in the classroom. So those are your tier 2 and your tier 1. Some of our tier 1 kids, and we'll talk about it in a second, qualify for enrichment. They're extremely gifted in either reading, math, or both, and so they go to enrichment. And then you have kids that are just like average students, which is a great place to be, but there's things we can do to enrich their lives too, and so we're working on that. And at Superintendent's Conference Day on Friday, we did a refresher on one of our programs, IXL, and how to use that in the best way possible as a tier 2 or a tier 1 enrichment, tier 2 intervention or a tier 1 enrichment. And our teachers are really excited about that. We actually have a team at Brooks Hill, the 5th grade team, volunteered to do a walk to enrichment model, which is during that time when the tier 3 kids have left the room, the 5th grade team is breaking up kids by need and strength, and they're going to be providing intervention there. So we're so excited about those trailblazers. That's like the model of walk to intervention. Can you tell how excited I am? I was like, woo!
And I'll just add a few things, like with those K numbers, like our model at K is prevention. Right. So like a lot of those numbers, we'll look at it again at 8 weeks. So we'll check in with everybody in 8 weeks, be like, oh, they just need a little extra learning, a little extra repetition. All that's being done with those kiddos is repeating what's happening in core. So I'm assuming, hopefully, fingers crossed, that those numbers are going to go down because we're hopefully preventing anything from happening. What else was I going to say? Oh, the other thing that's kind of interesting in looking at those numbers, when we're really looking at those who qualify for services, we're looking at like the 21 percentile and below. But those kids all have different needs. They could have accuracy needs or they could have fluency needs. And the kids that are getting help with word recognition really are the ones being pulled for accuracy. Where during tier 2 in the classroom, we're looking more at the fluency support. So it really depends on like what our numbers are and what intervention actually fits that child. Some can be done in the classroom, and some, we need to pull them out for intervention. So it's a fun puzzle to put together.
So how do we redeploy our interventions if someone's making really good progress, and I don't know if it takes another screening to get them into a different tier before we say, okay, we're going to move now to someone who needs the support that hasn't been getting it? Like, how does that work?
That's a great question, Rich.
So we are progress monitoring every week. So these kids who are intervention, they're getting a probe every week. We're comparing that to the norms to see where they are. At 8 weeks, we'll check in on that. And if their the graph is going up and their progress monitoring is going up, then at 8 weeks, we can dismiss them back to the classroom. For kids who are struggling in the classroom, there's teaming processes put in place at the schools, and then those kids, there'll be spots opening up for those students as well. So every 8 weeks, we're checking in because we really need 6 data points to say, okay, they're good, we can send them back, or you know what, we really need to talk about the student and put them into services.
And then Lisa said something that was a little bit concerning. So the messaging to parents when it looks like they're in tier 2 or 3 and we just don't have the resources to provide interventions, like what is the plan in those situations, and what is the messaging to parents?
Yeah, that's an interesting message because we are confident that we are servicing students that have accuracy needs. That's what we're prioritizing. Fluency, the speed at which you read, is something that we're handling in the classroom. So we are confident that we're servicing the kids that truly cannot recognize either letters or words at this point. Fluency is something that will come out with practice, and we're confident on that model too. I mean, in an ideal state, we would be able to give every kid exactly what they need, but that would just break us. And we do also, Rich, have a relatively responsive intervention model as far as our interventionists. So we have 2 district-wide interventionists that we're able to send to the places or the grade levels or the programs that need them the most. Right now, both of our district-wide interventionists are being sent to JA. They had the highest numbers, especially in 1st and 2nd grade. Second, yeah. So we really needed them there. And so that has been, thank you to the board for approving those positions, because we've been able to use those people really, really well and smart. They can actually provide intervention in both literacy and in math. And not everybody can. So they're trained in both, and we're excited about those pieces as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, literacy. Let's do math. Ready? Dun, dun, dun. Oh, sorry, just kidding. Hi, our 6 through 8 secondary. So for literacy for our 6th through 8th graders, we spend a lot of time on K5. 6 through 8, we use the NWEA MAP test. We used to use that for all K8. But what we found was that it wasn't telling us the right things that we needed to know about our K5 kids, so we shifted to AIMSweb. So that's the first time we've done AIMSweb as a universal screener for all of K5. We're sticking with 6 through 8 for our NWEA MAP ELA for our 6th through 8th graders. And so everybody took this test. Again, all kids tested, students with disabilities, students receiving services, students with ENL classification. And you'll see here the results of that. And this is a completely computer-based test. Any thoughts or questions on this one?
So that does seem to feel that middle school, like, what can we do in terms of interventions at the middle school level?
Yeah. So we actually then, so we'll get these results, then we go in and we probe, like we would for our little guys. We do more tests to find out what do we know, what do they need, where is the specific breakdown. You can also tell in this test, because it is computer-based, if a kid just rapid clicked, because kids do it. I don't know if anybody has a kid or was that kid. So we can tell how fast they do it, so if it's not an accurate assessment. But we can also go back in and probe. We look at historical data for these kids too. We've got lots of years of data, so we can tell you might have fallen in the tier 3 for MAP ELA, but historically you've always been a solid reader, so maybe it was a fluke, and we can do more tests to find that out. But the intervention specifically that we're providing in middle school is reading lab, and so students are assigned to reading lab, and those ratios are, I think, usually about 10 kids in a group, sometimes more than that. But it's a different model than we're doing at the elementary schools, so those sizes work. Unless you are a student with a IEP with a reading diagnosis, you might be in a smaller group than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, like, the interventions they're using at 6-8 are very similar to the interventions we're using at K5, because we have to go backwards. So we have to fill in those gaps. So our middle school interventionalists are very, they know what's going on in K5, they know the interventions we're using, they know the language we're using, so they're able to pick it right up and fill in those gaps at middle school.
Is reading lab, like, instead of their normal reading
Nope.
or ELA class, or how does that fit in their schedule?
It would be like an elective that they would be taking. Some of them have it 5 days a week, some of them have it every other day. So it's something, it could be instead of a study hall typically, but students could also need math lab. And so sometimes if you're a kid that qualifies for both reading lab, math lab, and maybe you get also speech, there's something that has to give. And so those are conversations that we have with families on, listen, we think this is the best way to support your kid, and we might have to not have, I don't know, health class this year. But don't worry, they had health K through 5, they're gonna have health again. So we help parents with those decisions.
They delayed Jacob's Spanish, for example, so
Yep.
he was able to do Spanish in 9th grade, and he's doing it again. So he's where he needs to be, but it just looked different.
Sometimes
So I
you
could-
shift.
If they wanted to stay, like, for example, in band or orchestra, are they able to then
Yep. There's
still
other
stay?
things we
Okay.
can do. We're overprescribed in many of our electives for students. And so there's options for families to choose from in order to get kids exactly what they need and still love school. Right? Yeah. Nobody wants to bore a 7th grader to death. That's not going to go well for any of us. Right. The other thing I wanted to add was, I think that you're aware of this, and I know we're coming to a board retreat soon, but we are working hard to, not only have we trained all of our interventionists in letters, which is grounded in the science of reading. We are also on a path to train all of our interventionists in Gillingham, which is an approach for really tricky readers. And so when we end up with kids that, let's say in the 8th grade, that have been in tier 3 for 5 years, what do we do? And sometimes you need to dig through and problem solve and figure out another approach. And that's what Orton Gillingham is going to equip our reading literacy specialists to be able to do. So that's something we're working on training everybody in. We've got a 3-year plan to get everybody done.
I was just going to say, in the interest of time, can we move on to math? I'm
sorry. We've been chit-chatting away,
No,
haven't
and
we?
I know you're going to be at our retreat to do some PD.
We can
so
do
that'll-
more. Thank you for moving
Wonderful.
us. All right. I can just cut my next presentation shorter. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So math universal screeners. So we for K-8, this is one slide because we do the same type of screen for every student. It's NWEA MAP Math. The K's not on there, but I have those numbers. I thought I added them. I apologize. They might be in the board report. I can get those to you for sure. The only one that's not NWEA, well, they use NWEA. It's just a whole different test because it's really about number recognition for K's. Okay, so I can get you those numbers. I apologize. But again, the expectation is that they know nothing. They don't know their numbers and can't recognize them. And you'll see our numbers are so much lower in math for universal screening, which is exciting. All right. So what do we do then? We started with this. We're going to end with this. We look at the needs, we analyze, we develop a plan. And for most of these kids, what that meant was, let's look at, the first line is enrichment. I referred to this a little bit. Some of our kids that are in that tier 1 are exceptional students and are now getting enrichment in either reading or in math. So that's 61 kids in grades 3 through 5 in reading and 49 kids in math go to an enrichment model that's run by our Spark teachers. They love it. We also look at those scores and the availability and all of those things. We have to make the same decisions on either end of the spectrum on how many kids and what makes sense and who needs to be there. So we're excited about those numbers this year. And then intervention for totals for students that we're servicing across our K-8. We have 587 students in reading and 294 students in math. So you can see the reading need is higher, the literacy need is higher, and the math is much more manageable at this point. But we also look at our assessment results, and we look at, and I talked about this a little bit, but we look at things by standard, question type, the trends across the buildings, across the cohorts, the gaps, and then we use all that to look at curricular shifts, lesson focus areas, and then what else we can do during that tier 2 time for kids. All right. Data snapshot.
Are there questions? Yeah, you don't. I didn't mean for people to stop asking questions. I just wanted to go to math. So, are there any other?
I do
yeah.
think the punchline here is at the end of the day, all this good information gets brought to the board probably around April or May, and that's when you talk about curriculum writing, right? So that's where all this goes, and that's where that collaboration comes into play. So that's really exciting when you see the teachers talking about this data on conference days, and then during the summer it gets deeper.
I got a text from Jackie, our director of humanities, on Friday. She's like, Tanya, the engagement in this room around data is so exciting. I sent it to Brett. That's what we want. We want teachers to feel informed, empowered, and feel their impact, their efficacy on their students that they have in front of them. So,
Thank you.
all right. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
I'll just sit here.
Okay.
Unless, Brett, do you want me up here?
Well, you can hang out there. I do think that we will probably move through this one because I think there's a very important conversation around facilities planning. This has been an ongoing conversation regarding the wraparound care. It's been a board's expectation that we continue to look for the best options for our community. And for the past several weeks, I've been giving you weekly updates based upon some of the meetings that we've had. We've talked to multiple different areas, districts, community partners. We're really right now engaged with Parks and Rec as well. They become an interested party along with our YMCA, and trying to make sure that we are getting the best possible option for our families, because we do know, and I have talked to community members, I've visited with some, they're looking for creative options, right? And they understand that this is a reality of it, but at the same time, we need to make sure that, and I know it's the board's expectation, that we can look in the mirror at the end of the day and make sure that we're giving them the most affordable but high quality program when it comes to wraparound, because it is a part of it. And I've been putting it out weekly. Are there any questions offhand? We won't go through this presentation, but you do see here are the start times. Right now, as is, we're going to continue to always look to adjust, but this is our best projection at this time. These will be the start times, with Dudley, Northside, and Brooks Hill being at 7:45, and then you have JA at 8:25, clustered with JP and Martha Brown at 8:30, and the Minerva DeLand Fairport High School. Again, in 2026-27, we're talking about gives parents well over a year to start figuring out what does wraparound care look like. And any questions, I don't want to go through, reread the reports for you, but you've been reading them and you might have some questions.
Just a quick one, and I know we talked about it way back. Can we just refresh, why are we moving JA when they're already an earlier start time?
So JA, again, that's about busing and busing efficiency, making sure that we have, we studied to see if we can get everybody on the same route, 7:45. We just don't have enough buses, right? It became about an economies of scale. We never would be able to get kids to school and then pick them up. And then we looked at taking Brooks Hill and putting them in the middle tier, if you will, and switching them with JA, and we didn't gain any efficiencies from that as well. And since JA is already in that tier right now, that would be the least impact of the elementary, so that's why we kept them where they are. But there was no good reason to switch those tiers, but you can't put them all on the same tier because we just don't have enough buses. Then it would become about purchasing buses, which would become correct.
I think one of the follow-ups of that is, like, it's true that right now JA is grouped with the middle schools, but also right now JA is already earlier, so the staff and the families are already used to the earlier start time. So why are we switching them later and everybody else earlier if we don't have to, like, disrupt the JA school? So when we did the busing, was it that it was a wash, or when we did the busing analysis, it just wasn't any more of it?
If we were going to, Mr. Stevens, you were in on those studies as well, so feel free to jump in. But when we put Brooks Hill in the middle tier, then you're having the opportunity of making the village with JP and Brooks Hill that much more crowded, creating an unsafe environment. Again, putting JA with that tier. What time do they start right now?
It's 8:10. I was going to say it's a 15-minute
It's a 15-minute change. So it was less, we felt, of an impact.
Right.
At the end of the day. Yep.
I was looking it up because I was going to
Was
say because I thought it was either a 10 or 15-minute adjustment, which I would think is less disruptive than changing everything. Yeah.
And as far as the wrap care, what time, this is very specific, so not exactly like what time, but I'm curious, currently at JA, for example, do they have AM wrap care before the early time?
They do not have AM wrap care right now at JA because it's so early.
So I'm wondering, are we thinking that that's going to be something the community wants, is before, on your slides it says AM, PM, that they're going to be wanting to drop kids off before 7:30?
As we narrow it down, that's a question we have to answer. I don't know the answer to that, but if the need is there, we're going to have to respond to it. And I know in our neighboring districts, when we went to Webster, they had a morning, they had some morning sessions based upon, the parents' needs.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the cost, Tanya, why don't you talk a little about some of the ranges that we've seen? Just, I mean, again, you've had access to these, but just really
The
briefly.
range.
Yeah, so there's quite a range depending on the providers. And what we can discern right now and on that range is the perks that come with one of the providers outside of the wrap care. So it's part of a larger program, right? It's more of an established recreation center that you get access to as well. And so we continue to explore. We want both reasonably cost because we know that's what our families are asking for, but we also want high quality programming. And so we don't want to sacrifice one for the other, right? And so we've explored,
Sure.
I can say it?
Yeah, sure.
Webster, Greece, the YMCA. I have a meeting tomorrow with Parrington Rec to talk about potential partnership there, and then we're also exploring potentially a provider that other districts in New York State are using right now that could potentially come in. So we're not leaving any stone unturned, as you can see on the rocks there. But we really do want to make sure we're doing our due diligence as a district in supporting what our families need in order to access our schools in a safe way for their kids. And we know that this time change is going to have an impact. I personally am using wrap care in my kids' district. We live in Greece right now. And so we use wrap care both before and after school. It works for our family. And it's really convenient. My kids love the programming and the providers love my kids. So we're really, really happy. It's been a godsend to our family as well financially.
We're looking to settle in on this probably, hopefully, before the end of the year. I mean, like the 2020-24 year, so December. Hopefully, we'll have some thoughts around that to get our heads around. Like, if we go with an outside provider, it will be the most effective and cost-effective way to do it versus even our own internal program. And there's costs and benefits to that as well. But we're aiming for quality, but an affordable, reasonable price, relatively speaking, to childcare.
And I won't go into this whole slide, but we compared the two. We compared Webster and Greece in their programs. One runs completely outside, one runs completely internally, and both provide programs that families are happy with. There's, as with any program, there's strengths and gaps, right? I can't find one that's definitively better.
I guess it's about overhead too.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, that's, the bigger the organization, the more spread out they are, there's more
Capacity. Yeah.
there's more costs that they have to.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really appealing to me that I hope some of our local pieces work out in a way that, having a partnership it just makes sense from a fiscal perspective.
All right,
I mean,
and then
sorry, just real quick.
sorry.
I mean, it definitely does look like there are pretty specific trade-offs that we would need to consider our unique community, right? I mean, just running down the list, District 1, look at the last few bullets, offers one-on-one aid support, but no provisions for drop-in or vacation care. And it's kind of flip-flopped for District 2. So it does look like we could, obviously part of this process is considering, well, what does our community place their priority on and how are we going to, get the most people what they need, so.
It does seem that, and just kind of hearing a few things from the community is that, I'm sorry, the Celsius has not kicked in yet apparently, that parents with children who have special needs really crave a safe place for their children.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely fair. We've explored in Greece where they actually do work on supporting students with disabilities actively with one-to-ones as determined by CSE. They are currently, I believe, servicing 3 students across their entire portfolio of elementary schools with extra support to be part of wrap care. If you look at our numbers compared to their numbers, we have so many fewer students that have a one-to-one during academic schooling day.
So I think the operative word was per CSE, right? So that's a committee
yeah.
decision. So the CSE would, if our programming would support that situation, why wouldn't we do it if the CSE recommends it? But if our programming wouldn't, based upon the resources we have access to, then, that's a different road.
Yeah.
But, I think, I know this board and I know the board's priorities. I think that I kind of sense where we would want to go, managing it to do what's best for the kid.
Yeah, I would just add, and some of us have students, either have worked with students with disabilities or have our own children with disabilities, that the support students needs to access academic programming is often very different than to access play-based care. And so that's why it's a CSE decision. I know. So
For the very reason.
yeah,
she
because not everybody needs it, right? It's like you need something different to access math in a classroom where you have to sit in a chair for 40 minutes than you do to play with other friends in a 1-to-10 ratio. That's the other thing. The ratios are so different in RAP care than they are in a classroom as well. So those are all things to consider when we're thinking about the impact financially for the district.
Even the where, and I don't want to keep going on, and we don't need to get the where squared away, but you take a look at what's happening with Merv at the land. There will be an opportunity there possibly to consolidate resources and use the facility, as a child care after school center. So we're looking at all the different options that we won't need to know by December, but we will have hopefully a recommendation for the board that we would be providing it, so then families we could start communicating and we could start planning. So thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for the updates.
Are we good? I know we're going to continue to have conversations around it, but I think we wanted to make sure that everyone listening at home knew where we were in the process and gathering information. So, absolutely, that it is a top priority, of course. So you will hear more about it because there's lots of work to do. So we are up next with our facilities planning update. And Mr. Provenzano, I'm going to hand it over to you. And
so I think
Mr.
we're going to have tell me if I'm wrong, a hard stop time of 5:55. Is that what we're trying to do? 5:55. So
Yep.
We do want to continue to talk about where we are in this facilities planning process. I'm going to ask Dr. White and MC, and I think Lisa, you were there as well.
it's okay.
Erica, as you were part of the facilities planning team that met in the summer and on Friday at the conference day, and we're trying to get ideas from these grade level or building level teams, and we're building a project and we're taking through a process. And I really am proud of the fact that whatever it is we come up with, we could say that we have tried to create a project that had the user's voice in it. Okay, and having the stakeholders understand the capital improvement process, taking a look at our building condition survey, which is the useful life and health and safety items that we need to address without a doubt. Mr. Stevens is going to talk a little bit about that. Getting lots of great feedback and understanding the fiscal parameters. Those are real, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we could talk about some potential themes and scopes. This is what we did on Friday. Fiscal parameters were a big part of the conversation. The board, I'm going to be looking for the board to continue to give me insights as to what are the parameters. I'll be recommending a no additional tax impact project as we move along, and talk about how we can use our reserves to achieve that. And we want people to be able to just communicate. Here's our timeline. We're right on target. You'll see we're reporting progress today, and by December 1st, we hope to have a final meeting with the facilities team that will narrow the scope of the project along with the costs, and then present a potential project for the board to consider in December. Right on target. Thank you for allowing that to happen. Mr. Stevens, I don't know if we wanted to go through this really quickly, or did you want to go to the fiscals?
We can jump. These were the themes that we had talked about
did last
before.
month.
Consideration. So I'll kind of run through this piece here as we look at, the planning for the K-8 facilities project. We talked about a project referendum vote in the fall of 25 as the potential date. Really highlighting opportunity costs, escalation, useful life of the different aspects of work we're looking at. It allows us the ability to try to align oncoming debt within our current debt service schedule when local share drops off. So shifting, in terms of timing of referendum votes, shifting just means when we look back at cost, we have to kind of re-estimate and look at those different pieces. That's when we really kind of owned in on this piece here. We talked to the group about prioritizing building condition survey items. I mean, they're really protecting our investment, our infrastructure pieces, our systems that are becoming outdated, that help with efficiencies and controls across the district, useful life, health, safety, and security, some of those key aspects of work that we talked about. And then the construction itself, consideration piece, schedule and phasing. So when we look at planning capital improvement projects, we look at the work within each building and make sure that can align with a construction schedule and phasing work. For example, if we do a large portion of work in one particular building, depending on the magnitude of that work, it could mean that work could take a longer time, which means costs escalate over years. So we have to keep that in mind when we're building capital improvement projects. And then scaled project scope to manage the budget and the financial impact. That's essentially looking at areas, scaling it to the building in terms of the type of work, and maximizing the efficiencies of work that we would be doing and types of work within the building. Economies of scale to maximize the efficiencies of construction. So that's again through the bidding process. Any economies of scale we're able to recognize when we do capital improvement projects. We try our best to keep that in mind.
So one thing that, just to put a reality to that, we have all these people sharing all their good ideas and thoughts and passions around why we should be doing a certain area. At the end of the day, when we make a recommendation, it may not look exactly like the way people are asking for what Matt just said. If we're going to be, working in one area because that's a priority, but then we're going to tackle another area because it makes sense because we're already there. That makes sense to do it rather than going back and spending money at a later time. So that's where the team will get together and say, well, since we're in this area, let's, do A, B, and C. We can't do A, B, C, and D, but we can do A, B, and C, and then we got to pick up a G because G makes sense from a construction phasing perspective. And that was important for them to understand, is because we don't want them to think that they're giving us all this good information and then we go ahead and do what we want to do. Am I saying that correctly?
Yep. Yeah, I can give you a kind of an example that we talked about in the meeting is work over at Joanna Parent, for example. We replaced steam boilers to hot water. We were up in the ceilings doing piping and I won't do it full justice in terms of the type of work, but all of the work up in the ceilings that had to take place. We had some asbestos abatement that we were able to accomplish during that because we're up in the ceilings, and then we replaced classroom ceiling and lights in the spaces we were in, all because they were coming down anyway, and there's no sense of putting back old ceilings when we're doing that work. So that's kind of our economies of scale, our efficiencies when we're doing work in a project. Some may say, why wasn't the entire classroom reconstructed? Well, that's because we were up in the ceilings and doing that particular work, and that was the plan all along. So that's kind of one example in terms of how we look at projects and areas of where work's being done and trying to look at the building condition survey. What are things that have been identified in that space that we can take care of at the same time? So, and then jumping to financial, that's again, the different pieces we have to keep in mind: our state building aid ratio, our maximum cost allowance, the aidability of a capital improvement project, our local tax impact, debt service, and then we look at the capital building reserve monies.
This is an important reminder. In 2023, the passing rate was 73%. There was a summary of the additions, 0 added increase. Then you take a look at the FHS track, which was, again, the big shocker in my mind because there was the most energy around there, and that was 57%, and that was a $39 per year increase. And that just goes to show you, in my mind, one of my big takeaways is I think our community is trying to talk to us. As excited as they were about that and how wonderful and powerful that was close, right? And so that's reason why I keep talking about the importance of making a recommendation that has 0 tax impact as we move forward in offsetting with reserves. And then you'll see 2022, that vote is what it was. That was $59 per year, right? And again, that was, I think, the community trying to speak to us as well. And then in 2019, $45 a year. I think we were fortunate enough to get that at 68%, because there was a lot of safety and security and BCS items in there. But I think we need to be very conscientious of this. So as you're going to take a little field trip now, and you're going to take a look at an activity that we did where we asked the users to prioritize with pins. We gave each group 12 pins, right? And you know what we said? You got to take 2 of those pins immediately and put them in the health and safety. And they were not happy. Right? It was.
I was going to reiterate that.
I brought all my own pins tonight. Red.
But I think it was a great reality check kind of for people, because it's easy to say, we want this, this, and this, exactly what Mr. Provenzano was saying. But when you see how you have to spend the money, what needs to be done in order to accomplish certain things, it was great. I loved being part of it and kind of hearing the conversations and seeing what folks were prioritizing and their aha moments of, wow, we can't do that without this, this, and this. So I thought it was great, but I'll hand it back to you.
Same sentiment. It was really interesting hearing how different groups were prioritizing aspects of their buildings and saying, well, if we can only put 1 push pin, but there's 10 squares here, would it be better to get this covered in this one and then do that next one? It was just a great conversation.
Can I
Great
jump in real quick,
activity.
MC? So just as like a backing up, they each got a map of their building with areas color coded of like which areas might potentially have work done. And then on the side where you see the push pins, there's like lists with little squares kind of representing how much work that would take. And so if they wanted to do it and there's 2 squares, they have to like put 2 push pins there. So, and then they had to discuss as a team of people who work in that building what they would prioritize and how they would distribute those pins.
It doesn't.
It's just Fairport colors.
So I would say it's 5:34, 5:40. Let's come back together. Then Matt's going to talk about the fiscals, so you can get a sense of what people are asking for.
Okay, so this